Well, welcome everyone. This is Dr. Liz Pierce. We're webcasting from EIT 220, and this is Data Science and Technology. And today, what I wanted to do was just continue our theme for the week, is talking about the semester project. And so I've got the steps from Ederica, and if you looked at some of the assignments from last week, you'll notice that this is just one of many examples of how you can organize your project. But I'm going to show you an example of a project report. It was actually done as a master's project, so it's let me put it this way, it's kind of bigger than what you might expect to do in this class because we're just one semester, but I think it was such a nice example of these different phases. So that's what I want to showcase for you. So keep in mind that as you work through the semester on your project. Oh, and Derek, what's your question?
Okay, my question is it okay if I send you my topic for you to go through and see if it's okay for me to start? Go ahead and start.
Oh, Derek has a great question. He says, if I have an idea, can I just send you an email letting you know what I'm planning to do, just to make sure I'm on the right track? And Derek, that is perfectly fine. In fact, as we go through the semester, we'll probably be pausing periodically to see if folks have gotten an idea. And by the way, Derek, this might be good. What is your idea?
I'm trying to focus using Python and then maybe combining some medical images to detect whether a patient has a diabetes or not. That's what I want to do.
Oh, here.
With regression analysis or something like that.
Okay. Yes. That would make for a very nice project. And generally, so Derek says he's very interested in Python. He'd like to develop his skills in image analysis, and he's kind of interested in the medical area. And he's kind of curious: is there a link, between looking at medical images and diabetes? And that is very good. And that's a nice example. And as we talk about the discovery phase, you definitely want to pick something that you feel is beneficial. It's going to maybe build on your skill set. It's an area you'd like to get into. Maybe you're interested in getting into imaging informatics, which is a big thing in the medical area. So Derek, your next challenge is since you're making good progress on phase one discovery, you do want to read up on this area, and you want to Google, using medical images, diabetes, to see just how do you do that? What have people written about that? And then the other thing you want to do is check out, can you get a collection of images related to diabetes. Uh, 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 and I'm going to put in, let me just see if they have anything. And Derek, have you looked? Is there have you found any data sets?
I have the idea, but I'm trying to search for the data sets from
Right, right.
I think if it's possible, I'm going to use an open source data set. So I'm going to use GitHub or Kaggle to see if I can get data set from that site.
Yes, and just to give you an idea, because this fits very well with our topic for today, is Derek, you may want to check. I just saw something. They were looking at retinal scans to see if that if they could scan somebody's retina and see if that would correlate to whether or not they had diabetes or not. And Hota, we actually covered that question that you had, but let me just reinforce it. Every student has to do their own project. So every student has to do, a project that ends up being about 30 to 40 hours worth of work. Now, and that's very important. I don't want 4 students who all did 10 hours of work getting the same grade as one student who did 40 hours of work. So if you want to coordinate, meaning you're picking a problem and you're all interested in that same challenge, you all have to devise your own section of that problem. And so one way you might do it is, you may be all looking at similar data, but each person is looking at a different technique or a different approach for addressing that problem. So the key thing, Hota, is what you want to avoid is if you're coordinating with someone, make sure that each person is putting a full 40 hours into the project. And again, that's just to mimic the workforce. The idea of a team is not that the whole team is working 40 hours a week. If you have 4 people on the team, you still expect 4 times 40, 160 hours worth of work. If somebody's not working, that means we can reduce our staffing. So keep in mind, that is the key thing. So Hoda, that's the main reason I kind of, in a way, discourage team projects because I want students to understand that they all have to pull their full weight. Okay. But this was very nice. So Derek, thank you. So Derek has already started thinking about what he'd like to do, and he's starting to now also think about, is there data? And I want you to notice on this chart, do you see how the arrows go back in circles? Yeah, sometimes you have a great idea, and then you find out, well, maybe I can't get the data right now. And then you may want to go back and adjust your problem. So keep in mind, there's a lot of back and forth. Okay, but this is great. I'm glad to see that some folks are already starting to think about what they'd like to do and where they might find the data to do it. And I think Derek's example also does a nice job of illustrating that a lot of times for your data science project, you want to narrow the focus and the scope. So looking at all images related to diabetes is probably too much. But getting a data set where they're asking the question, well, what does images of the retina, what does that tell us about diabetes? And here's a data set where we have a whole bunch of retinal images, and some of them are connected to patients with diabetes, and some of them are connected to folks who do not have diabetes. Can we come up with some sort of prediction or classification model? And Hoda, it all comes down to getting onto the internet. And the other place that you can look for data sets, for example, that are medical is PubMed. PubMed, in addition to publishing articles, nowadays they also will look to try to publish articles and the data that goes with those articles. So yes, in addition to just Googling the internet, if it's medical related, a great source of information is from the National Institutes of Health and it's their PubMed, which is, as I say, it's not just articles, but data sets as well. And yes, and the one that I found for retinal analysis, that just came from plain Googling. You know, medical images, diabetes, data sets. So hopefully this is a nice example. We're using the power of Google, which uses a knowledge base and some, you know, I'm certainly, they use some AI, I'm sure, and some other advanced technologies, does a great job of, yes, helping you to try to connect yourself with the resources. Okay. And just to keep in mind, the full model is that once you get to your data, then you got to think about what are the techniques or approaches that you're going to use. Are you're going to do exploratory description? Are you going to be looking for patterns and trends, correlations, associations, root cause analysis? Do you think you'll be doing a prediction, classification? Do you think you might be trying to identify the most, you know, optimal solution? So thinking about what you want to do, that's all the, notice the first 3 steps are really planning and getting the ideas organized, getting your data organized, thinking about what your skills need to be, what skills you need to acquire, and what are the tools. Because you're certainly not going to do this project with you know, pencil and paper. What kinds of tools would help you in accomplishing your desired goals? And then you've got the model building. Now this is where the actual work starts. And this model building is kind of where you want to be, you know, going into April. You know, as you're approaching like spring break, which is about the last week in March. Yeah, you want to be ready to start now building and doing your analysis. And then this is an important step. The last 2 steps, that's what often gets overlooked. Because usually, you know, you get into model building, and before you know it, you're looking at finals. And we mentioned that first of all, you're going to have to write a report. And we'll talk a little, actually, I'll show you an example of a nice report. And we'll talk about the 3-minute thesis that's also on tap for today. This step 5, operationalize. Let me just explain what they mean by operationalize. How are you going to use your results? So Derek is a nice example. You know, he's going to try to come up with a model that might, you know, be able to, if you feed it a retinal image, it'll produce a classification. You know, where, you know, 80% confident that this person, you know, has diabetes, or in this case, you know, for this image, it's only 10% sure that they have diabetes. So, so you've got this classification model. What you want to think about is how would somebody use the results of your analysis? And so operationalize, sometimes you hear people talking about actionable insights. What can I do with the results of your analysis? And so this is a very important part. As you're doing your work, think about how your work will benefit others. What's in it for other people? What new capabilities, what new opportunities, how might somebody use the results of your data analysis? In some cases, it may be a one-time use. In other cases, maybe this can lead to something that can be done on a regular basis. So by the way, you don't have to worry in this course about having to actually put your stuff into production or to actually get somebody to use your work. But the operationalize might be a section in your paper where you talk about the potential contributions, potential benefits. Maybe you'll talk about, maybe future things that need to be done in order to get your work to the state that it can be used. There may be limitations. What we're going to see is that many of our models, well, they change over time. I mean, the environment changes over time. You build a predictive model, and then what happens? The climate changes or conditions change, the needs change, and all of a sudden, that model becomes out of date. So it is fine that number 5 really can just be your thoughts, your best guess as to how folks might use your results as well as future enhancements. Okay. So this was good. Are there some other questions? This was great to have folks, saying, oh, okay, we're thinking about the project. Yeah, what other questions do folks have? Okay. Well, let me show you, I'm going to show you a data analysis that was done by Davis Award. He actually graduated in 2023 with his master's in information science. And he was pretty pleased because his project, he felt, was very useful for him getting a job as a data analyst with Walmart. And for us in the information science department, that's kind of a big deal for us. Whenever we have a student who says, I was able to get a job at Walmart or Amazon or Google, our ears really pick up because these companies recruit from all over the country and all over the world. So it is very competitive. Okay. And part of the reason he did this analysis is he had been working as a data analyst and doing dashboards and things with Tableau. But yeah, he was interested in getting that promotion or opportunity to go to the next level. And so that's why I encourage folks, think about what can this project do for you beyond just getting a grade in the course. What can this project do for you, personally and professionally? Again, maybe it's just something that you have a personal interest in. That is fine too. But a little bit of background on Davis, and I had not realized this, but Davis has a background in baseball. I did not realize he had been a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. So this gives you an idea as to why, when it was time for Davis to choose a topic, he chose something that was related to sports. And here, let me make this nice and big. And that's kind of a nice thing to think about is, you might say, man, what does sports have to do with Walmart? Well, the thing is he did a really great job doing a kind of a very interesting sports analysis. And, if you're Walmart, if somebody can do a great job, with sports, you've got confidence based on their skills and their creativity that they could take those skills and apply it to questions that Walmart has. So a little bit of background on this topic. So as you can imagine, Davis, very much into sports. In addition to baseball, he's very interested in college football. And he got very intrigued because if you study college football, one of the things you'll notice is that schools will pay a huge amount of money to get a good college football coach that can help the team, get to a conference, get to a national championship. In fact, at a number of schools that have big football programs, the coach is actually paid more than the university president. And so he was, looking at this whole question of what makes a good football coach. I mean, if you're going to be, paying these huge, huge salaries to a football coach, how can data science help you select a good football coach that's going to be successful? So that's what he started thinking about. And Davis, as he started looking into this area, he had a couple things going for him. One is that he did look at the literature. And so part of getting started is he certainly was looking at some books and articles and everything that he could find that talked about, sort of the value of coaching. And so, and he, of course, had his own subject matter expertise in the sense that he picked an area that he had spent a lot of time, listening to sports broadcasts and sports discussions about this issue. So one of the things that you'll want to do as part of your discovery is to take the time to pick an area that you're able to find articles that can help educate you. And if you do have the opportunity to pick something where you can find a subject matter expert, that is great. It is perfectly fine if all your expertise will just come from articles and blogs and videos that you can find on the topic. That is fine. Davis, in this case, had the advantage that he had some of his own expertise to draw on. Okay. Now, as I say, this is a nice paper. I should mention it's not a perfect paper. I like the fact that he had a nice title page. And I think this is very nice too. We'll be talking about the 3-minute thesis. Having an abstract or an executive summary, which you will write last. This is one of the things is the abstract or executive summary kind of comes first after the title page. But you can't really write it until everything is done. So, but the abstract or executive summary is basically meant for if somebody doesn't have the time to read your full report. Do you have a 1-page, half-page, paragraph, some quick summary that they get a sense of what you do? And so notice in his abstract, he basically gives, basically in a few sentences, he kind of summarizes the problems. Even though there's been a lot of statistics in football around the players, there's very little out there about statistics for what makes a good coach. And so what he did is he decided that he wanted to try to collect data as well as to try to create some basic metrics that schools could use to try to predict, based on how a coach had been performing, how likely is it that their success would continue in the future. And he mentions he's going to look at 3 different metrics. He wanted to know how well a coach did in terms of game performance. He also wanted to know how well coaches did in terms of developing player talent. And he also wanted to know how well did coaches do when it came to recruitment. And so basically, this project is all about his journey in analyzing the validity of these metrics, developing these metrics, testing and evaluating these metrics. And one of the things that he found is while he found that coaches' game performance and player development seems to be what he called sticky, meaning if a coach has good game performance in their past history, and if they have good player development in their past history, he did find that those coaches seem to continue that in the future. But interestingly enough, his study revealed that coaches' recruiting ability is actually seems to be less connected to the coach themselves. And we asked Davis about this when he kind of defended his project. And one of the things that he suspected was that it was probably more the reputation of the program and the school that was more important than the personality of the coach. And so it's quite interesting. He found that a coach's past performance in recruiting might not carry over when he goes to a new school. So, but you'll notice that abstract, and again, this can give you an idea for your 3-minute thesis, is the abstract is sort of that short, quickie read, that 3-minute read that kind of provides the motivation, describing also what you wanted to do, how you did it, and what were your results. Davis also provides a table of contents. I think I would have preferred to have the table of contents on a separate page. But as I say, that was more of a formatting preference. I have seen some papers, again, they have everything on a single page. Okay. So Davis starts off, with an introduction, and we've actually covered a little bit of the introduction. I will say this about the part of his motivation is that, as he looked at, how do you rate coaches? One of the things that he had noted is that it's so common to judge a coach based on wins and losses. And he writes in his paper that, one of the things that always bothered him about wins and losses is that, he had watched college games where the team loses because of a fluke play. It's that ball is thrown just a degree or two off, and it results in an interception, and the other team wins. And he said, that's not really the coach's fault, And the other thing he didn't like about wins and losses is he says, well, if you're a top-ranked team like Ohio State and you're playing like a non-ranked team like Appalachian State, you're expected to win. So he said, again, does that really make you a good coach, the fact that you're a powerhouse team and you beat a team that was sort of not in your league? So he liked this idea of, thinking about what are some better ways of evaluating a coach. And he certainly did want to get some measure that reflected game performance, but he wanted something that was maybe more in tune with something that was more reflective of the coach's contribution versus a fluke play or versus simply being the more dominant team where you're expected to win anyway. And I think one of the things that I think Walmart, would have found attractive was the fact that he was trying to think outside of the box, trying to think beyond just traditional measures, but actually trying to come up with some measures. And as you read the paper, you may have some ideas for other metrics, and that is perfectly fine. Again, a lot of time doing these projects simply comes down to just like any project, you can't cover everything. And so, sure, were there other metrics he could have looked at? Certainly. But to keep his project manageable, he said, I'm going to look at 3 metrics. And so he's got his introduction, and he talks a little bit of how he looked at the literature. And then he has a section where he talks about, okay, I've got some metrics in mind, but can I collect the data for these metrics? And so his sources was, first of all, he found an R package. We'll talk a little bit about R next week. And this one is a package where you can get all sorts of information from collegefootballdata.com. And so this package allowed him to get a lot of data for things like play-by-play events, team talent ratings, recruiting history, coaching history, betting odds, game-by-game, ELO data, and expected points added data, just to list a few. And some of these metrics I wasn't too familiar with, but it turns out, when it comes to sports betting, there's a lot of metrics that people have put together to try to, if you will, gauge the expected likelihood of, making the next play and kind of interesting. There's a lot of good information here that I think a lot of people hope to capitalize on, operationalize by improving their ability to, do successful sports betting. And then it turns out there was some data that he needed that he couldn't get from college football. And so, for example, he had to go out to various sites to try to get coaching history for coordinators. That was very interesting. He was looking at head coaches, but a lot of head coaches come up the ranks. They start off as coordinators, like defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, and then they move up into coaching. And he found that it was actually kind of difficult to get coordinator data. And as I say, in some cases, you go down an alley and you have to just say, yeah, I was so interested in getting coordinator data. And it turns out he really had a lot of difficulty finding a reliable historical data set of coaching staffs. And one of the things that he did was, taking the data from that had been collected by sports sites like collegefootball.com and taking his own collections of what he could scrape off the web. Part of what he did was he had to build sort of his own data set. I will mention it is not necessary that you build your own data set. If you are able to find a data set that will serve your purposes, that's fine. But I think for Walmart, they were very interested, not only that he was able to get data that had already been collected and curated, but the fact that he was able to go and research and get some data himself. Okay. And as they say, he used a variety of methods to do the web scraping. I think his favorite site to web scrape was 247sports.com, because it had a lot of information. Here's a case as this site had a lot of good ranking information and a lot of good history, but they did not have an API, so you could request this data and get, a nice, a listing, array of data. And they did not have a download function. So they had all this great information, but you either had to hand copy the information or get clever and figure out a way that you could use web scraping to basically extract the data off the web pages and get it into a spreadsheet format. Okay. Now, and he did use some various tools to help him do this. Now, one thing that you'll find when you write your paper is it's a real balancing act. On the one hand, you want to tell a good story. But on the other hand, sometimes you like to show some detail. Now, Davis, because he was doing this for his master's project, he actually did a live presentation where he took questions and answers, and he was able to show us samples of, how he did the web scraping. Hindsight is always 20/20. In hindsight, I wish I had asked him to take those details and put that in the appendix. And that is, again, a little tip for folks. Yeah, where you've done some nice coding or you use various tools to get your data or to do your analysis, probably in the main body of your report, you want to kind of focus on the main results and what you were able to accomplish. But, sometimes to get to your main results, you have to put in a lot of work. And it's a good idea, and again, the appendix is a great place to just kind of summarize, hey, here's a little bit more details, some samples. Here's a little bit of the fact that before I could get to my final model, I actually had to look at 6 or 7 models before I got to the best one. And certainly in the body of the report, you can kind of summarize that. But if you'd like to include a little bit more detail, like some of the scripts that you used for the other models, and maybe some of the comparisons of of your results, those extra details, the appendix is a great place. Okay. And he also did some scraping from Wikipedia. So a good part of his project was first developing the idea, thinking about how he would develop some metrics, and then going out and trying to figure out where he could get the data. And very much like our chart, it was not a simple step 1, step 2. In order to develop, he had these concepts of what he wanted to capture, and he knew that there were various indicators of game performance. There were various indicators of recruiting. There were various indicators of developing team talent. But until he could find the data, he didn't quite know which of these indicators that he could actually get data for, and then how he could organize or look at this data in order to create metrics that he could then evaluate and test. So he did a nice job of telling his story. In real life, he probably spent a lot of time going between discovery and data preparation, and then thinking about his model plan. Okay. So then he talks a little bit in his analysis section, and what was nice is he has kind of an introduction to his analysis, and then what he did is, because he was looking at 3 different metrics, he decided he would organize his analysis into 3 different subsections: in-game performance, the ability of the coach to develop talent of their players, and then recruiting. So the first metric was in-game performance, and as I mentioned, he did not want to stick with the traditional, let's just count up wins and losses. And so what he did is, let me just kind of go a little bit backwards, is, let me see if I get this here. Okay. Okay. So let me just, I'll go backwards and then kind of go forward. So here's an example of the type of data that he could collect. So he could collect information about the team and the coach, and what season that that this record belonged to. He could find information on point spread. Some of these sports data banks had metrics to basically give an idea of individual player talent. It turns out some of these sites actually would rank each player and give them points as to how talented they were. So you could actually then take the team roster and you could actually total up the team talent points. And then there were some of these other metrics. And so so things like the moving EPA average, the EPA above expected, these were all metrics that he could pull off of these betting sites and off of these sports sites. So to help the reader follow all of that, a couple things that he did in the section on coaches' performance is that he went through and he explained what all of these things are. So he explains what ELO is. He explains, team talent. He explains, what we mean by spread. And this actually comes from betting data that these sports. And then, so a number of these data that he collected actually does come from the from these websites, and a lot of them, let me put it this way, makes sense for the football aficionado in terms of understanding, well, this is what these sites are gathering from all the game data, and these are metrics that they are calculating and publishing that people can analyze. Okay. So what did he want to do? Since he wasn't going to use wins and losses, what did he want to use as his metric? And so his idea was, he felt a much more reliable measure of coaching performance was the net yards per play. So he had looked at wins and losses versus a coach's, versus the team's net yards per play. And he found that there was a really strong correlation. So net yards per play refers to, the team's ability, every time they have a play, how many yards are they able to gain? And certainly, when he looked at the correlation, he found that, yes, teams that are able to do better job moving the ball are generally the teams that end up winning. And so he said, what I like about yards per play is one, it's actually a good proxy for winning. And he said, I also feel that it's a little bit more robust. It is not so much skewed by that fluke play. So he liked it for those reasons. But he said it's not just net yards per play. He said, I am really interested on how well a team performs their yards per play better than what is expected. So, for example, we took the case of Ohio State, who's a real football powerhouse. If they play a little nobody team, yes, they're going to have a lot of yards per play, but they were expected, to basically win by 60 to nothing. So he wanted to basically kind of weight this metric by, well, how much better did they do than expected? And on the reverse side, suppose if you're little Appalachia State and you upset Ohio State, you actually win the game. Or instead of being 60 to nothing, it's a very close game. That's really is maybe more of a testimony of the coach and his ability to prepare and work with his team. So what Davis essentially did is he got his spreadsheet, and using his spreadsheet, he had his actual data, and he wanted to come up with a model that would basically help him make a prediction of what was expected. And so just using for his statistical analysis, this was actually the model that he came up with. But this model is actually what it is. It's just a regression model. It's just basically x equals a constant plus, here's a set of weighted variables. And you say, so where did this regression model come from? Well, it came from his spreadsheet. He had collected, for his coaches over a number of seasons, he had collected the data for each one of these variables. And then he just did a linear regression model to try to find a good fitting model that would relate these variables to yards per play. And then what he was doing is once he had sort of his, based on what is expected, he would then go and say, okay, so now that I had, my historical my historical variables, and I came up with these predictions, now I can go to the website and see, hey, what was the actual result of the game? Who actually won? What were their actual yards per play? And how well did they do above what was expected? So notice here, the model was predicting like 2.22 yards per play, and it was actually 1.17. Actually, it was 1.172, and this was a negative, and so the difference between the two was 3.39. And then there was another model expected points added, and again, he was basically able to measure, who performed better than expected and who performed worse than expected. Okay, and that was the metric. And of course, what was nice too is, again, he put a lot of thought into this analysis. So, for example, he said, in order to have reasonable results, I really don't want to work with coaches that only have one season or two seasons. So he decided that, he needed more of a history. So he purposely said, I'm going to focus my analysis on coaches that have been around for a couple years and he decided to set the mark at 3 or more, seasons. But again, he'd been putting a lot of thought to this, and he thought, well, coaches who are in their first season, they're still building the team. So, he wanted to, pick coaches that had been there long enough that he felt that the predictions would be relatively good. And part of the way that he evaluated it is he actually split their season actually based using a temporal time frame. That is, he first developed using the first, if you will, 60 to 70% of their history. He used that to build his predictions as to which coaches were doing the best job of performing above average, basically average or below average. And then he said, I'm going to break that. I've got then my 3 groups of coaches. Historically, which coaches were performing better than expected, which coaches were performing pretty much at expectation, and which coaches were performing below expectations. And then he said, well, I wonder how well that holds up. So he then looked at the remaining, let's say, 30 to 40% of the coach's history. And what he essentially did is he said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those coaches that historically were very good. And when I look at their most recent performance, what are their statistics when it comes to yards per play? And he did that for the average coaches and the coaches that were in the lowest third. And he did a simple analysis of variance, which said, yeah, statistically, the good coaches in their most recent performances, the last, 30% of their, data, most recent data, they're still outperforming the average coaches, and the average coaches are still outperforming the group that is in the bottom third. So he was able to show that, that there was still a statistically difference, between the 3 groups. Okay. And I want to watch the time here. So if you look through the rest of the paper, he then switches then to player development, and it turns out he collected information on how many of a coach's players went to the All-Conference and All-American teams. And he now this one, he did not have to do so much of a regression analysis because a lot of this data he could get from the football sites. But what he did was, again, kind of similar. And by the way, he also looked at NFL draft data. But basically, what he ended up doing after analyzing this data was kind of similar. Now, in this case, based on his analysis, kind of similar, he looked at using the existing data and basically identifying, again, the top third, middle third, and bottom third in terms of how well the coaches did in terms of their development scores. And then and then similar, when he compared to say, okay, based on their most recent seasons, how is the good group doing against the bad group? And he noticed that the good group was still in terms of the development metric, still outperforming the bad group. And you'll notice that the reason he showcases the bad and the good is probably the average group was not that statistically different. But certainly there was a difference between the top third and the bottom third. And again, for the recruiting, he was using recruiting rankings that were coming from these college football sites. And so when he looked at the different recruiting, again, and some of these metrics are very simple metrics. He said, I'm just looking at the average of the previous 2 seasons recruiting scores. And he kind of did the same thing. This is the one case where, when he looked at, past history, he had his groups, who were the tops in having great recruiting scores, who were in the middle, and who was in the bad. And then he said, well, okay, that was based on their past seasons. When I look at their most recent seasons, what happens to good, bad, and in the middle? Well, notice, he noticed, wow, in subsequent years, notice the good group and the average group and the bad group, they're all about the same. So he said, I know that's not a good metric in terms of predicting future performance. So of his 3 metrics, the first 2, he felt confident that they could help predict, future performance. But for this one, again, he felt there were other factors at play. Okay. All right. So there you see him, as I say, developing these metrics, gathering the data, analyzing, in some cases, using various statistical methods, regression, analysis of variance, using averages to be able to come up with these metrics and to evaluate their performance. Okay. Now, this is what I like, use cases and conclusions. Another way of thinking about use cases is operationalize. How would I put this information into use? Basically, that's what it means to operationalize. How do I put this stuff into practice? And so he mentioned, the impact it could have was profitability. Many schools derive a lot of income from their football programs. So certainly being able to come up with better coach performance metrics means that if you can use that to recruit and have a better coaching hire should mean, better, team performance, which would hopefully mean more revenue for schools. So that's a reason why, folks might be interested in what he's doing with college football statistics. Okay. And he kind of summarizes, his success. But this is also a great thing. He talks about how he could have improved this work. And he mentioned that, one of the things that's lacking is there's not a lot of coverage of assistant coaches or, those coordinators. And he said, so that's a limitation. I just couldn't find data for these folks. And then he said, one thing that has changing, and this is for folks, players now, there's now been a ruling that players should be able to profit from their own name, image, and likeness rules. And so this is very interesting. How is that going to impact recruiting? Will players choose schools based on which schools can give them the best deals? when it comes from getting paid to play college sports. So that's a big issue for him. He did not know how that was going to impact. And then for folks who watch college football, the transfer portal is another thing that kind of plays into this. And then the other thing is, what about computer vision? There's a growing field in video sports analytics. What happens when we get really good at real-time video sports analytics? How will that change the whole field of coaching? And so, and he mentions there's been a few papers in this area, but that'll be very interesting. What happens when you have a sports analytics real-time AI review system think about it. Could you create an AI virtual coach that can help pick the next plays or help analyze, the team strategies and, put forth a recommendation for, well, if we want to catch up, here's what we have to change, or here's what we need to do in order to win. So this is an interesting thing. How will that maybe impact the future? Okay. And then he had his acknowledgments, and then, yes, he has his references. And in his case, some of his references came from his data sources, and of course the tools that he was using, and then of course the articles and some of the things that he was using, excuse me, plus the fact that, plus the fact that he had, of course, many years of watching college football to kind of add to this. Okay. Now you'll notice that this is about 25 pages, and that is because this was based on 2 semesters worth of work. Actually, probably 2 semesters and a summer in between. If you take a look at our guidelines for the paper, which you can find right here, the main thing is that, notice here, I'm really looking for papers that are probably 10 to 12 pages. Students have always asked me, can I do a longer paper? Yes, that is fine. You can do a longer paper, as they say, but usually 10 to 12 is what I'm looking around for a 1 semester data project. I put the 20 just because, I don't want students to feel like they have to do a 30, 40, 50, 60 page paper. And again, I'm assuming a reasonable font, single spacing, or, if you want to do a little bit more than a single space, that is fine. I kind of like 1.15 is a very comfortable spacing. And then just, and just regular margins. And then, for any undergraduates, they should follow the same guidelines as the graduate students, but their grading is curved. So what happens is I look at the graduate papers in one pile, but then I have the undergraduate papers in a separate pile, and I'll rate those differently. So it's kind of like a golfing handicap. Each person needs to do their own project. It is okay to have coordinated projects, like 3 individuals doing different parts of a larger project. But the key thing is each person should be doing the same amount of work as an individual working alone. So you need to do your own report, your own 3-minute presentation, and you need to be putting in the same amount of time as somebody who's working alone. There's a lot of people always say, what's the format should I use? I was going to say, there's lots of formats. I have another little sample paper. This was based on analysis of some survey data. But you can You can use a similar format as Davis Ward did. Um, in some cases, students say, well, I'm working on a project with a professor and we're using this article format or we're using this conference format. Is that okay? And the answer is yes. So there's not, one format. Same thing with the references. It's very good to list your sources. And by the way, again, you can also list, in addition to the articles, maybe you have other resources. Maybe, you did extra videos. Maybe you did some extra training. Maybe there were some other sources of books or reference materials. It is fine. Make sure you put that in the paper. There may be some things in your literature review that you are particularly citing that, hey, this person did this and it's relevant to my project because of this. But then you'll have just general references. Hey, I use this resource to help me with the Python code, or I use this resource to help me with the web scraping. That's a great place. Again, you want to communicate and let me know, hey, I did a lot of work for this project. So as I say, don't be fearful about tooting your own horn. Okay. And again, we've got the introduction, your literature review. Again, 10 to 15 is flexible because sometimes on some topics, for Davis, he had more like, 7 to 10, just because there wasn't a whole lot in his area. But these give you some of the sections. Now you may notice here that, and I could make this kind of optional. I should add this though, just for completeness. Welcome to add an abstract or executive summary. This is optional since you will also do a 3-minute thesis. Okay, but this gives you a little bit of the outline, and I also have some other resources that you can use. And so you're going to be doing a project. You're going to be writing up, let's say a 10-page project report. And by the way, things like your code or some additional materials you can put in your appendix, that is fine. And then the other thing I would really want you to do is to do a 3-minute thesis. And let me give you, I was going to say, let me get you, and here we go. I've got a couple resources for doing a 3-minute thesis. Okay, so let me just explain what that is. So, for the final assignment, you've done the work. There's an assignment for the report, and you can upload your report, and you can then also upload your 3-minute thesis. This could be a PowerPoint with an audio track. This could be a phone selfie. That will work. Anything that you can use to either record the audio or the video. If you are facing severe technology issues, sometimes that happens. You can also do a script, in a pinch. But a 3-minute thesis, what this is, and first of all, let me just mention is, here we go. Okay, so what is in a 3-minute presentation? So a little bit of background. So the 3-minute thesis was basically about talking about your project in 3 minutes. This became a big thing because one of the things that many schools were noticing is that their students at the master's and graduate level were not able to do a good job communicating about their projects. And this is really important because research gets funded by industry, by government, by philanthropists. And so it's really important that you're able to talk to them in a concise, summarized way about your research. So, research is tied to funding. Funding is typically not provided by other researchers. It's provided by business people. It is provided by folks that, first of all, may not know your jargon or academic language. They may not know about, all the theories and the background. What they're really interested in is what you're trying to achieve, the desired outcomes. And they really want to know why they should be excited and enthusiastic about your topic. So typically a 3-minute thesis, this is not reading me, your abstract, what you're trying to do, and this is almost partly a sales pitch. So what you want to do is write, and sort of your first minute is basically trying to catch the attention of the audience and basically trying to provide the motivation incentive. And then what you are then trying to do is then walk them through how you're planning to achieve your objectives and what are going to be what are your results, how do you feel that your work is going to contribute. And the other thing about the 3-minute that I really like is you get one visual, you get one PowerPoint or one visual, and you're really not supposed to have any slide transitions, animations. It's basically, this is just a visualization for the audience to look at while you give your talk. Okay. And so this has a lot of good tips. And this also link also has a bunch of good tips. And then it is very important. It is very important that that you take a look at some practice sessions. Okay. And we're running out of time, but do make sure, take a look at some example 3-minute thesis competitions. You can find them on YouTube. I love YouTube. Yeah, just look for 3-minute thesis. You can look at winning presentations. You can look for tips. This one, I really like this one. Really talking about the importance for students. It's this one right here. This is a great one. It has sort of the tips about how important it is for students to engage with their audience, to really say, what's the big picture? Like, think about Davis. He talked about, how much schools rely on getting money from their football programs. And so, talking about, the potential for, profitability. So he's taking, just these 3 metrics, which may not be all that interesting, but when you connect it to the larger picture of a college or university getting more money from their sports programs, again, that is something that is going to attract interest. Okay, so there's a ton of good stuff. And Derek, I saw your hand was up. I just wanted to finish off. I am done here, but let me just open it up for questions. Or Derek, did I answer your question?
Professor, Dr. Leaf,
Yes.
yeah, I mean the 3-minute video, is it only for the project or it's going to be part of the homework or the assignment?
The 3-minute, that's a great question. The 3-minute video is going to be part of the final report.
Okay.
So yes, so it's not a separate assignment. The grade for your project is going to be based on your report along with your 3-minute video. And Dennis, absolutely. If you have an idea for a project, you can run that idea by me. If you like to do it, beginning or end of class, you're welcome to. If you're not comfortable and would just rather just send me a quick email, that is okay too. And I should mention also one other thing. Is that this week's assignment, and I'll put that into our announcements. Part of the thing is this week, the main reading is looking through these different documents and checking to see how many of these topics you feel comfortable with or that you would feel useful to review. So I've got some things on, statistics, visualization, stuff on doing predictive analytics. Each of these links, takes you to a page. So the main reading for this week is just checking to see what you need. And then the main assignment for this week is picking one of these tutorials. And I should just, I'll also put this into the announcement. One of the things is sometimes I'll have tutorials that will cross over assignments, and that's very common. There might be, Python for text mining that also is applicable to, AI. And so I wanted to include the tutorial because it was applicable to both assignments. But in terms of your work, you want to make sure if you have one of those crossover tutorials, if you used it for one assignment, pick something different for the other assignment. And again, that's just for a level playing field. So if we have 10 assignments, I want folks to do, 10 different assignments versus someone who did 8 assignments and they double counted 2. So we're not, and they say we do have some crossover tutorials that were applicable to several weeks, so they're listed in both weeks. But I try as much as possible to kind of warn folks, hey, if you have one of those crossover assignments and you used it for, week 3, pick something else for the next time that crossover assignment appears. Okay. Anything else as we wrap up? Oh, and Dennis is quite right. We have Dr. Dagtas working on weeks 4 through 6. So I'm going to see if he has any assignments. If not, that's okay. There's plenty of work to do on the project. So if he's got an assignment, that's great. If not, hey, we're not going to worry about it. We'll have plenty of readings and stuff to do. So So we'll find out from Dr. Dactus if he's got anything for weeks 4 through 6. And Lynn says, don't encourage him. Yeah, we can be very quiet because, as I say, there's quite a bit to do with the project. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that we don't have an assignment every week, because that just means certain weeks you have more time to, work on ideas and data and doing the background work. Or, if you look at all the different statistical techniques, yeah, there's 2 or 3 weeks of reading, right in there, just kind of reviewing your stats skills.
Even outside of the reading, Dr. Pierce, outside of the reading, those modules are really time consuming, especially if you're doing the lab portion of them as well.
That's right, particularly if you're trying to not only get through the videos, but to get through the labs. So as I say, giving folks a little bit of a break here and there, not a bad thing at all. All right. Well, with that, everybody have a good rest of the week. And for anybody who needs to be on the road this afternoon, be careful. I think I was on Highway 10 this morning, and yeah, quite a bit of ponding on the road.